The dust in the old ranch kitchen never settled, it just rotated, a golden galaxy stirred by generations of Compson feet. Every footstep on the 70-year-old linoleum, the color of faded butter crisps, released a whisper of history. Today, those whispers were drowned out by the furious, impatient staccato of my sister Jessica's designer boots. "Be logical, Liam, it's derelict," she declared, her voice slicing through the familiar hum of the avocado green refrigerator. She held her sleek tablet aloft like a judge's gavel. A glowing spreadsheet displayed a number so large it felt imaginary. "This offer from Clear Vista Properties is a miracle we don't deserve. Luxury townhouses with artisanal coffee on the ground floor. We split the proceeds cleanly, 50-50. It's the only rational choice." I stood at the chipped enamel sink, its surface stained by decades of mineral-rich well water, my gaze fixed on the window Grandpa Bill had framed with his own hands. He'd chosen this view with a painter's eye, the endless rolling Oklahoma prairie, the ancient gnarled elm tree he'd proposed to Grandma under, and the weathered red barn where I, at age 8, had learned the connection between honest sweat and profound peace. My heart wasn't just heavy, it was a lodestone, pulling me deep into the floorboards. Wildwood Ranch wasn't just land, it was the smell of Grandpa's cherry wood pipe tobacco layered over the scent of rain-wet sage. It was the feeling of Grandma's flour-dusted apron against your cheek during a hug, a specific, textured love. It was the nightly symphony of crickets that played you to sleep and the pre-dawn chorus of meadowlarks that sang you awake. "Grandpa left it to me, Jess, to manage, to live on, to keep," I said, the words sounding feeble against her financial artillery. "To be buried under," she countered, her tone not unkind but clinically factual, the tone of a senior analyst presenting an inconvenient truth. "Look at you. You're a freelance graphic designer. Your office is a laptop. You can work from Bali or Boston. This place?" She gestured broadly, her gold bangle catching the morning light. "It's an anchor in a digital sea." She wasn't entirely wrong. The roof over the master bedroom wept rusty tears when it stormed. The fence posts along the north pasture leaned like a row of tired old men. The furnace groaned with the existential dread of a veteran on one last campaign. But this anchor had held our family fast through the Dust Bowl stories Grandpa told, through the recession that swallowed Dad's hardware store, through the quiet, hollow ache after Grandma passed. This kitchen was where Mom, her hands trembling just slightly, had taught us to knead bread dough after Dad left, saying, "We just have to work the feeling through, babies. Push, fold, turn. The gluten will form." Where Jessica, at 16, had celebrated her full-ride scholarship to an East Coast university with cheap sparkling cider, her brilliant eyes already fixed on a horizon far beyond these familiar grasses. I'd been the one who stayed close, the one who fetched Grandpa's heart medicine from the pharmacy in town, who held the steadying ladder for Grandma as she picked the last stubborn peaches from the old tree, who learned the secret to her pepper jelly, a pinch of fearlessness, she'd wink. I was the audience for Jess's dazzling graduation speeches, delivered via shaky video call from her law school library, her ambition a bright, burning star I admired from a continent away. The weeks following her initial declaration became a cold war waged in silent kitchens and over text messages. Jess's side was fought with spreadsheets, inspectors' reports, and calls with stern-voiced realtors. My side was fought with wire cutters, bags of concrete mix, and long afternoons with Joe, the 78-year-old ranch hand whose face was a roadmap of every season at Wildwood. We communicated through terse notes left on the fridge, anchored by the faded magnet from the 1998 Cheyenne Frontier Days rodeo. Meeting with surveyor Tuesday, 10 a.m. Be presentable. J. Patching the south paddock fence with Joe. Sandwiches in the cooler. L. The fragile truce shattered, then unexpectedly reformed one rain-lashed Tuesday in late April. A spring squall knocked out the power just after lunch. Jess, in the middle of a high-stakes video conference, let out a groan of pure frustration that seemed to rattle the mason jars in the pantry. I didn't say a word. I simply went to the utility drawer, found the long matches, and lit the 3 old kerosene lanterns that hung from hooks in the ceiling beams. Their warm, wavering light painted the kitchen in liquid gold, deepening the shadows in the corners and making the chrome on the old stove gleam. The modern digital hum was gone, replaced by a profound, almost sacred silence, broken only by the relentless drumming of rain on the tin roof, a rhythm as ancient and comforting as a heartbeat. Driven by a muscle memory deeper than thought, I walked to the pantry. I pulled out the big ceramic bowl, the sack of flour, the box of lard. I started cutting the cold white fat into the flour, my hands remembering a recipe my mind didn't need to recall. "What on earth are you doing?" Jess asked, her face illuminated from below by the cold, eerie glow of her dying phone. "Rainy day," I said, not looking up, echoing Grandma's immutable law. "Rainy day means pie. Apples from the cellar are still good." She watched me, a statue of modern exasperation, for 10 long minutes. The only sounds were the scratch-scratch of the pastry blender, the low hiss of the lanterns, and the rain's steady song. Then, with a sigh that seemed to rise from the very soles of her expensive boots, she placed her phone on the table, screen down. "You always roll the crust too thick. It ends up soggy on the bottom." She washed her hands at the sink, the water splashing in the sudden quiet. She took the rolling pin from my grasp, her fingers brushing mine, cool and sure. We didn't speak, we just worked. She rolled the dough into a perfect, even circle, her movements economical and precise. I peeled and cored and sliced the tart Granny Smiths, the knife thunk-thunk a steady rhythm on the worn wooden board. I sprinkled the sugar, she dusted the cinnamon. Our movements were a silent, familiar dance. When I fumbled the lattice top, the strips of dough sticking to my floury fingers, her hands darted in without a word. She wove them over and under with a lawyer's deft logic, creating a perfect, beautiful grid. "Show off," I muttered, unable to suppress the ghost of a grin. A flicker, a mere echo of a smile, touched her lips. "Just competent." As the pie baked, transforming our labor into an aroma that was the very definition of home, buttery, sweet, spiced with nostalgia, we sat at the scarred oak table. The lantern light softened the sharp, worried angles of her face. She told me, in fragments, about the unrelenting pressure of her partnership track, the silent judgment in boardrooms, the exhausting, endless climb. I told her about the quiet panic that woke me at 3 a.m., listening to the wind howl, wondering if I was a caretaker or a captive, preserving a museum no one else wanted to visit. "I just want you to be free, Liam," she whispered, tracing a knot in the wood grain. "Unburdened." "I am free here," I said, my eyes drifting back to the window, to the elm tree, now a solitary, steadfast black silhouette against the storm-purple sky. "It's a different kind of free." The pie was sublime. We ate it warm with sharp cheddar cheese, as Grandma had insisted, but the piece was as fragile as the flaky crust. A week later, the formal bound offer from Clear Vista arrived by courier. The number was astronomical, life-altering. Jess held the thick document, her knuckles white. Her eyes held a complex cocktail of triumph, sorrow, and a desperate hope that this would finally resolve the ache between us. "It's time, little brother," she said, her voice firm. "We have to be adults now. We have to make the hard, smart choice." My gut screamed a primal, wordless no. In the chaos of my grief after Grandpa's funeral, I'd vaguely sorted his papers, but I remembered him, in his last days in the hospital bed we'd set up in the living room, his papery hand clutching mine. His voice was a faint rustle. "The law is in the box, son. The heart is in the land. Both matter. don't forget the box. I thought it was the morphine, the rambling of a fading mind. Now, desperate for any thread to grasp, I went to the box, an antique humidor of polished mahogany that had always sat on his desk, smelling of cedar and old paper. Beneath the straightforward deed, the insurance policies, the military discharge papers, my fingers found it, a single crisp sheet of heavy off-white parchment, folded in thirds. It crackled with authority as I opened it. At the top, in Grandpa Bill's precise, unwavering architect's handwriting, it said, "Addendum to Last Will and Testament of William J. Compson, the Homestead Clause." My breath hitched. I carried it into the kitchen where Jess was resolutely not looking at the view. The morning sun streamed in, highlighting the ghost of yesterday's flower still on the table. "Listen to this," I said, my voice unsteady. I read it aloud, each word a clear, resonant bell in the quiet room. "To my grandchildren, Jessica Marie and Liam Thomas, I leave Wildwood in body to Liam, for he hears the land's quiet song as I did. But I also leave this condition, this secret stitch in the fabric of our family's story. The ranch cannot be sold, subdivided, or otherwise relinquished unless both heirs agree, in writing, before two disinterested witnesses, that the spirit of this land is truly, irrevocably, and irredeemably gone. That spirit is defined not in monetary value, but in lived moments. It is present when a meal is shared at this old table, when the first buds appear on the elm tree in spring, when the barn swallows return, when kindness is offered here without expectation of return, when memory is tended as faithfully as the garden. If that spirit lives, the land must stay. It is your sanctuary, not your asset. It is my final gift to you, not dirt and wood, but a place where you must find each other. Keep the hearth warm." Silence descended, thick and profound. A jet trail bisected the sky outside the window, a stark reminder of a faster, disconnected world. Jessica's face underwent a seismic journey, initial confusion at the legalistic opening, then sharp disbelief, followed by dawning, awe-struck comprehension, and finally, a raw, stunning vulnerability that stripped away every layer of the high-powered attorney. Her eyes, bright with a sheen of unshed tears, swept the room as if seeing it for the first time. They lingered on the windowsill where Grandma's jewel-toned pepper jelly jars sat catching the sun like stained glass. They moved to the doorframe where our childhood heights were still penciled in a chaotic timeline. Liam, age 7, Jess, age 10, Liam, age 12, almost got her. They fell on the pie safe, where my lone failed attempt at a crust from 2 days prior, a sad, thick disk, still sat on a plate, forgotten. A sound escaped her. It wasn't the scream of fury I'd half expected from the story's theme. It was a choked, breathless gasp, a release of air held for years. It was the sound of a dam breaking, of a weight she hadn't even consciously carried suddenly dissolving. That single sound held decades, the immense pressure to succeed in escape, the quiet guilt of leaving, the fear of a rootless life, and the desperate, love-drunk hope that this anchor might also somehow be a sail. She pushed back from the table, the legs screeching against the floor. She walked to the heavy oak back door, turned the iron knob, and stepped out onto the porch. I followed. She stood there, arms wrapped around herself, looking out at the endless prairie, at Grandpa's elm, now undeniably adorned with the first tender green-gold buds of spring. Her shoulders, usually a tense line of impeccable posture, softened and sank. "He knew," she said, her voice thick with a reverence I hadn't heard since we were kids looking at the Christmas tree. "He knew I'd run toward the future. He knew you'd stay to guard the past. He wanted to make sure we had to talk, to really see each other, to see this," she waved a hand at the vastness, "before we could ever let it go." "The pie," I said quietly, leaning on the porch rail beside her. The rainy day, she added, a tear finally tracing a path through her perfect makeup. The mended fence with Joe. The taste of Grandma's jelly on toast. The smell of hay after the first cut. The way the light hits this porch at exactly 5 p.m. in July. We were building a list, an inventory of small, holy things, a liturgy of belonging, spoken aloud for the first time. She turned to me, wiping her cheek with the heel of her hand, a gesture so profoundly the little sister I remembered that my own eyes stung. The spirit isn't gone, Liam. No, I agreed, the lodestone in my chest now warmed, transformed into something alive and beating. It was just waiting for us to remember how to look for it. Jessica stayed the entire weekend. We didn't talk about spreadsheets or roof repairs. We made a huge pot of Grandma's infamous everything soup with the forgotten contents of the roof cellar and the pantry. We ate it on the porch at dusk in our coats, watching the barn swallows perform their aerial ballets. We called Joe and asked him to bring his 3 grandchildren over to see the new wobbly-kneed calves. The sound of children's laughter ringing across the home paddock was a note that had been missing from the symphony for too long. On Sunday evening, as she packed her sleek suitcase, she placed a single sheet of paper on the kitchen table. It wasn't a sales agreement. It was a rough, hand-drawn flow chart, sketched in the same confident lines as her legal pads. At the top, in bold letters, it said, Wildwood Revival, a dual-air strategy. One branch arrowed to Jess's MBA and legal skills, grant writing, agri-tourism law, business structuring. Another pointed to Liam's design and stewardship, branding, marketing, land management. There were bubbles floating around the core, artist and writer retreats, the barn loft, organic heirloom herb garden, Grandma's plots, Compson pepper jelly, official small batch product, historical sustainability workshops, partner with State College. It was a dream, fragile, hopeful, audacious, and deeply, deeply rooted. It was a bridge. She didn't sell the ranch. We didn't just inherit it. We reclaimed it together for the first time, not as a parcel of land or a burden, but as a living, breathing story whose next chapter we would co-write. We became its new authors, writing not in ink, but in the language we were finally remembering, the quiet solidarity of a shared chore, the clink of a mug set down in understanding, the shared, watchful peace over a land that had always, patiently been holding us, waiting for us to find our way back to each other and to it. The last leaf on the old elm had never fallen. We'd just forgotten to look closely enough. It was always the first brave green bud of a new season, patiently waiting for its moment in the sun.